and you spin it retrograde, which is just only to say that it's just slowing down on its natural orbit, on its axis. It's slowing down on its axis. Therefore, in the naked eye, we see it slowing down and going backwards effectively in the solar system. Though that's just an optical illusion. It just happens to be going slower than Earth at a faster pace now. But what happens is when a planet's, in its regular direct cycle, we don't tend to think much about it. It's relevant what sign it's in, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that with Mars. But in general, we kind of go along, and life is as life is. But when a planet retrogrades, we start having to reassess how we do things. The capacity to be with emotion and not be identified, and see that, emotion is just energy in motion. And if I'm stuck in a certain sensitivity to something, whether it's depression or sadness or some form of, let's say, less comfortable emotion, there's creative energy in that, right? There's something that wants to actually be accessed, fully met, embraced, loved in a way that suddenly now I have access to this otherwise stagnant energy that's beginning to express as lower vibrations of, let's say, depression and such. I believe personally that at this stage in our collective evolution, it's all an inside job, and we're all just drawing in these opportunities to be mirrored back aspects of ourselves that we have to look at. And some of that's beautiful and some of that's challenging. And that's, of course, always going to be a mixture of both. But that's the real invitation, is tap into the feminine, tap into the intuitive. And in that way, it would make sense for anybody who's inclined to know their chart a little bit better.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Be the Vessel podcast. My name is Daniel and I play the roles of channeler and intuitive psychologist, aiming to bridge all aspects of the healing arts while navigating my return journey to the stars. I interview those journeying through all aspects of healing, whether that be from more traditional Western frames or from a more spiritual or spirit-based connection. What I always find is that everyone is a bridge between worlds, a universe unto themselves, and a unique light that shines brightly for the collective. If you like what you hear and are interested in more of my offerings, consider joining the Be the Vessel community at patreon.com/Dr. Daniel Atkins, where you will find various unique offerings, bonus content, and podcasts such as my own channeled information and the new Be the Vessel healing series. May you find what you're looking for and remember the light within. And lastly, the views in this episode do not represent my personal views, nor are they to be taken as medical advice or scientific fact. Always do your own research, come to your own conclusions, and trust your own guidance. Born and raised in Lincoln, Nebraska, Ryan Seaman made his way west in pursuit of fame and fortune as an actor and screenwriter. During a 3-year stint on Days of Our Lives, while co-writing a feature film screenplay that was fast-tracked at a major studio, all his dreams appeared to be coming true. His Saturn Return, however, had other plans. After a series of disruptive, read agonizing, plot twists, Ryan pivoted from the call of his ego, the dramatic arts, and heeded the call of his soul, the healing arts. After 20-plus years as a transformational bodyworker, yogi, and astrologer, Ryan opted for the road less traveled. From spending 17 years in a Gurdjieffian mystery school, to co-creating a graphic novel series titled The Medicine Gate, to working extensively with plant medicine in South America, receiving a direct transmission of astrology in Egypt, and co-founding a superfood pancake and waffle company called Living Prana, Ryan remains forever in awe and humbled by the undeniable influence our solar system has on the events we experience here on Earth, and the path it lays out for each of us to follow. In this episode, I welcome Ryan back for the second time as we go deep into the first transits of 2025, culminating in a powerful March eclipse season. We then explore the upcoming shifts for the rest of the year, including the larger arc of Aquarian shifts we are experiencing collectively. Lastly, we dive into the next generation of neurodivergent and gifted youth, as well as Ryan's company Living Prana and his passion for healthy living. While this episode is coming out already at the halfway point of 2025, may you find it useful for reflecting on the past few months and preparing for the months to come, including another eclipse season on the horizon. Blessings for the ride. Hey, Ryan.
Daniel, how you doing, bud?
I'm thrilled to have you back here and for us to be doing a second conversation. I was left wanting more, and that was honestly one of my favorite episodes. And I heard from lots of people. This is funny. They couldn't even tell us apart because we sounded alike. And when we got going, it was
That's
which
hilarious.
I take as a compliment because I think we were just in the flow, and there was so much left on the table for us to keep digging into. So I'm super excited to dive back in. And there's parts of your story, and parts of my chart, and parts of the collective that we haven't even stepped into yet. So I'm excited to see where this one goes. And I think a great place for a launching off point as we begin to close out this super adventurous year of 2024 astrologically and in every other way, and begin to prepare for 2025, which everything I hear intuitively and otherwise is that, it's going to be another bumpy ride, but not without its light points and its highlights and its expansion, but whatever we've been working through maybe since I don't know, 2020, 2018, for whatever this larger arc of transition and transformation has been, it's still underway. The metamorphosis is still underway, actually. And in numerology, we're heading into year 9, which is the end in 2025, which is the end of a 9-year cycle. So it feels like it's like one more year of whatever we're sorting out collectively, personally, individually, for a rebirth of stepping into something new in 2026. And I don't know how that will all mesh and play out astrologically, but I would love to invite you to speak a little bit about what we have in store upcoming for this year ahead.
Okay. Well, thanks for teeing that up. And yeah, I had a great time in our last conversation as well. I did feel like it was, we could have kept going. So here we are, keeping it going. Yeah, I think I'll start with where we are, and then I'll kind of build into what 2025 has in store. In the moment that we're in, Mercury's been retrograde for, about almost halfway through its retrograde. And it's in Sagittarius. And anytime a planet goes retrograde, we first look at what does that planet represent as an archetype. So Mercury it governs our communication. Archetypally, it's the messenger, right? It's the Hermes that's going to the gods to get the information and deliver it to the mortals down on Earth. And so you take that kind of planetary axis, the planet closest to the sun, which is translating the sun's energy in that way, and you spin it retrograde, which is just only to say that it's just slowing down on its natural orbit, on its axis. It's slowing down on its axis. Therefore, in the naked eye, we see it slowing down and going backwards effectively in the solar system, though that's just an optical illusion. It just happens to be going slower than Earth at a faster pace now, but relative to Mercury. So the gist there is Sagittarius, and the flavor of Sagittarius is the expansion, the aspiration, ruled by Jupiter. It's about a buoyant, there's a lot of gregarious qualities to Sagittarians in general, those who have the sun sign in Sagittarius. And so you put Mercury there. Mercury is the ruler of Gemini, which is the opposing sign of Sagittarius. Therefore, Mercury is not optimally placed. They say it's in detriment in Sagittarius, which is only to say that it's in a foreign country and it doesn't speak the language nearly as well, would be an analogy. And so the language we're here to learn relative to this Mercury retrograde is the higher mind. That's Jupiter, that's Sagittarius. It's the aspiration to a self. Like there's a lower self, Gemini, higher self. Sagittarius is kind of how the line or the axis is drawn in astrology. And so the learning, the opportunity, and that's what a retrograde really is. It's a chance to review the content of that archetype's energy, in this case, limiting beliefs. Those are the things that are really present right now. and ideas about ourselves that we see to be outdated, or perceptions of others, or just a lot of different things about growing into a higher connection or a higher source, or a connection to something more than the ego mind, let's say. And so that's the beauty of it. It's not always easy to look at that stuff or to feel that stuff or to implement the changes and belief systems and thought patterns to change, fundamentally change and transform those longstanding false beliefs. But that's the task, right? So that's happening. And meanwhile, while you and I are talking, Mars is coming to a complete halt. And Mars is about to go retrograde. Pertinent to this conversation is most of us hear about Mercury retrograde. It happens 3 times a year for about 3 weeks per retrograde. So it's a little more common and therefore not as I believe disruptive. But Mars, on the other hand, a planet that neighbors Earth, and therefore its frequency shifting is going to have a direct reverberation more immediately than the other planets, because Venus and Mars being the 2 neighboring planets, when they go retrograde, we feel that. And it has a vibratory effect. And then how that affects each of us is relevant or relative to our chart and like our natal chart. But this Mars retrograde that begins in 2 days. So those listening, it's retrograde now and going to be until the 23rd of February. So it only retrogrades every 2 years for about 2.5 months, right? So we're in a space right now where, what does that mean? I can say all of that, and if you're an astrologer, you have an idea. But if you don't know astrology, let's talk in just layperson terms. Mars is our assertion. It's the part of us that directs energy, that is the warrior. It's the force that we engage. It's how we meet the world. And so taking that faculty and then turning it a little bit off its center, let's say, it means we're going to be reviewing some of where either we're overdoing, overforcing, or holding back, not fully engaged. We're going to start feeling these qualities a little bit more pronounced. And what happens is when a planet's, in its regular direct cycle, we don't tend to think much about it. It's relevant what sign it's in, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that with Mars. But in general, we kind of go along, and life is as life is. But when a planet retrogrades, we start having to reassess how we do things. In this case, how we do Mars is the big kind of meat of the moment, and this coming to the end of the year. And what's amazing and potentially not the best news is Mars is optimal in certain signs and less so in other signs. I was talking about Mercury being in detriment in Sagittarius, for example. Well, Mars is currently in Leo. Mars is a fiery planet. It's the ruler of Aries. So when Mars goes into another fire sign, we like it. We get to feel it. We feel a certain passion, a certain engagement with Mars and Leo. Well, it's going to a stop, and then it's going to retrograde back out of Leo and into Cancer. Now, Cancer is where we spend about a little more than 2 months with Mars back in October, November, a little bit of September, I think, too. And personally, that was a really difficult transit for me. A lot of emotions, a lot of stuff, and required me to go through a lot of my emotional content, triggers that I have. And that's kind of what Mars in Cancer does, is it's a watery emotional sign, but so it's reactive, it's the anger, it's the aggression, it's those kinds of emotions that are on the reactive spectrum. And so that's what we're going to be reviewing and going back into as we come to the end of the year and into the beginning of the year. So I personally, on the level of astrology, follow the seasons more so than the Gregorian calendar as it relates to the new year. So we're entering the new year with Mars retrograde. It's the dead of winter in the Northern Hemisphere, at least. And so the idea that we're supposed to start anew, to me, has always felt rather counterintuitive based on the seasonal moment that we're in.
Mm. Yeah. Interesting. And yeah, to add to that, we have Mars going back through this sort of watery emotional sign. So it doesn't feel like getting a jump start in a new beginning to start the new year. It doesn't feel like we have that energy. And I know there's some other planets retrograde, and so it's like it doesn't necessarily give me the feeling of like, okay, out of the gate, jumping right ahead. It feels like, yeah, just having to, I don't know. Again, I guess I would always say this, but really stay tuned in to the energy of the body. If it's feeling revved up or if it's not feeling revved up. And I don't know how you would describe the best way to ride sort of the Martian energy in a watery sign, but it feels like that's what we're being asked to do, is flow with an energy that typically wants to go, um, but isn't having the full support to do that. I mean, for me, it's, as I mentioned, it's been in my eighth house, which is certainly a deep invitation. Also, where I have my Chiron and Venus, so it's a nice little um, eighth house, ripe with invitations, and it has been an interesting transit for me as well. So, how how would you describe the best way to work with that energy, that Mars energy in a watery sign as we enter into the new year?
That's a great question. So, especially with Cancer, which is ruled by the moon, which governs our intuition, which governs our feminine faculty on a very deep personal level. You take Mars and you realize, oh, if I'm acting out of, let's say, condition or obligation or even a force, that's not the play right now. The play is, what am I intuitively guided to do? And that intuitive guidance could be to do nothing. And that intuitive guidance could be to do something very outside the realm of what one might normally be comfortable with, and to follow that and to realize that intuitively that faculty is our main go-to. I find that Cancers are also one of the most creative signs in the zodiac, just gifted in their capacity for a number of different expressions of creativity, and that can run the gambit of whatever's one's own personal happy place or zone of genius. But the idea here is that it's very creative. So when you look at the new year and you say, okay, so the world's saying, let's set, our 2025 goals and intentions and all of that, I would invite a level of intuitively connecting in to what do I want to create with this masculine energy that right now I'm shoring up and connecting into on a level that's far more intuitively driven than it might normally be. And so that the exercises or the meditation would be, what is my intuitive, creative self inspired to lean into? And that could be something as random as origami or some form of painting or expression that was never really developed in one's life, but recognize, whoa, this makes me feel good. And that's really the point, I think, right now, is while a lot of feelings are going to come up with a Mars retrograde through Cancer, just as it did when it transited through Cancer a couple months ago, the capacity to be with emotion and not be identified, and see that, emotion is just energy in motion. And if I'm stuck in a certain sensitivity to something, whether it's depression or sadness or some form of, let's say, less comfortable emotion, there's creative energy in that, right? There's something that wants to actually be accessed, fully met, embraced, loved in a way that suddenly now I have access to this otherwise stagnant energy that's beginning to express as lower vibrations of, let's say, depression and such. And this time of year tends to lend itself to that. And I believe personally that at this stage in our collective evolution, it's all an inside job. And we're all just drawing in these opportunities to be mirrored back aspects of ourselves that we have to look at. And some of that's beautiful and some of that's challenging. And that's, of course, always going to be a mixture of both. But that's the real invitation, is tap into the feminine, tap into the intuitive. And in that way, it would make sense for anybody who's inclined to know their chart a little bit better, understand where their moon is in their chart where Mars is, as you said, in your eighth house, transiting in this retrograde, to know where the kind of like the source material of that content is accessible. And then for you, for example, let's say Mars transiting back into your eighth house, right? You said you had Venus and
Venus and Chiron.
Chiron, geez. So, you look at that and you're like, okay, so that's relationship, but it's relationship with energy. It's relationship with the layers of what the eighth house represent, which is that scorpionic, just beyond the form into the more formless, subtle sensitivities that we carry. And you realize, oh wow, there's such an access point. It's like almost like somebody's you or pulling this slingshot back into the eighth house, where Mars is the co-ruler of the eighth house of
Yeah.
Scorpio. You've got this, whoa, you have a lot more, let's say the well is much deeper than you might have realized. And you're just going, wow, I'm actually like I'm dipping my bow into like the most rich creative Shakti all the way in. And then when Mars goes direct, it's, now is the time of like, where do I want to aim all of this energy? But I have to, of course, feel it, accumulate it, and then
Yeah.
where to apply
I
it.
gotta stay in that backwards position, just building the intensity so that when it's ready to launch, it can do it in a healthy, sort of developed and integrated way rather than reactive
Totally.
way.
If you think about like during that stretch back, it's also how do you cultivate chi, whether it's qigong, harnessing of energy. There are so
Mm.
many physical exercises, and that's the thing about Mars too, is it's a very physical expression, and that we employ Mars when we're physically expressing ourselves. So that doesn't mean do nothing, but it does mean do perhaps a different form of intuitive movement that is, it's kind of like training in a way, like training for a marathon. You don't just run a marathon. Like if you had a marathon on the 23rd of February when Mars goes direct, would you just sit back and wait for it? Or would you begin to train and begin to build and do the progressive training that a marathon requires to perform effectively? And that's the kind of the invitation is, all right, we're not going to do nothing, but we're going to do things that feel more intuitively supportive to a wider mission that we're aiming towards. And that's what's great about a Mercury retrograde is we look at things from a different perspective. So with both Mercury and Mars going retrograde together, it really is a time of evaluating where I'm at, where I aspire to be, and what stands in the way of me being where I aspire to be. And is that limiting beliefs? That's the Mercury retrograde. Is that limiting actions or perhaps putting its energy and attention in areas that don't serve my intention or my aim for the year ahead? And so it's really such a review time, which is beautiful as long as you're not stuck believing you're supposed to be doing something else, right?
Yeah, and it seems like if we're all collectively looking ahead to our goals, to whatever we want to achieve with that like Mars and Leo energy, that next time that we really get to launch in that masculine way, that ambitious way, we're being asked to um in preparation for that, channel that masculine energy in a different way that isn't necessarily about goals or achievement or even necessarily the physical world. It's about the emotional landscape, harmonizing, keeping, allowing things to come into alignment and maybe express in different outlets that aren't so um, streamlined in order to just maybe you would say bring things back into balance, into chi, into yin and yang, so that when we do step back forth into that opportunity to launch, we have all of that integration or maybe new forms of creative outlet to help the energy flow in different ways that we've been missing. Um,
Yeah, that's well put.
And I also know that like we have a bunch of planets in Pisces too, and that's my fourth house, and that's where my moon's in Pisces. I got a lot of stuff there too. So it's like we got a lot of water, right? We're working with a lot of planets in water signs, like sort of, I'm not sure if you would, Saturn doesn't seem comfortable in Pisces either. So it's like we got a lot of strong-willed masculine planets in water signs forcing us to like um utilize this watery intuitive emotional energy. So is that
Yeah.
how you really see um the landscape of 2025 beginning for us, like that being invited to take that masculine energy, which we can see being used in various ways on the planet right now, and find more intuitive, healthy, adaptive, creative outlets for it?
Yeah, I don't know that I would have said it that way, and I wholeheartedly agree with it, though. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned something a bit ago that I really appreciated was that we are going into this Mars retrograde into Cancer, and then it's going to go direct again on the 23rd of February, and at some point, probably towards the end of March, right around the spring equinox, I believe, is truly the new year, when we begin to then have a buoyant energy that's building towards the solstice and so forth. So, yes, to take it into a space of exploring different avenues, whether it's, for me, for example, meditation. If I miss a meditation in the morning, the day unfolds differently, and never is it optimal to the days that I do meditate. So that connection in the morning is a good example, and I don't think anyone would argue that the data is more than sufficient to support that meditation is effective and relevant to harmonizing so many different aspects of our nervous system, our physiology, our creativity, our just inner harmony, right? And so, an example for anyone who's listening, who's been saying, "Oh, I want to meditate, I've been wanting to," this would be the optimal time to implement a new practice, a new way of initiating your connection to self. And that can look many ways. I believe there are a lot of forms of meditation, not just sitting on a cushion. And that happens to be something that resonates for me. And but the opportunity in a much broader sense is to entertain a whole host of things you might not have previously, to look at it differently, to understand it differently, to read the book that someone suggested that you thought long ago but then forgot about. It comes back around. Like, this is a great time to hook into information or ideas you had that somehow got lost in the shuffle, and then now is the time to reconnect. And this would be a great time of year to begin to implement new practices and habits, many of which with the watery signs. A good example, you mentioned Saturn and Pisces, and before Saturn went into Pisces, I was like, this is going to be unreal. You take the planet of structure and order and this earthly grounded thing, and you put it in the most nebulous sign in the zodiac, Pisces, water, with no form, no boundary, and no order to it, as an expression. I mean, Pisces are brilliant in all their ways. I don't mean to just throw them under the bus, but you put that planet in that sign, it's like, it's a recipe for a lot of destabilizing elements. And we've certainly seen plenty of that in the world while Saturn's been transiting Pisces. And to your point about, we're going to have Mars in Cancer, Saturn in Pisces, and Neptune's still in Pisces. We like Neptune in Pisces. It rules Pisces. That's the water we have. And then trying to think, a big thing we haven't talked about, and it's relevant only because Mars is about to do another opposition, and that's Pluto. Pluto going out of Capricorn and into Aquarius has been a substantial shift, probably bigger than many of us are going to be recognizing on the day-to-day. It's a transpersonal planet. Pluto's way out there. Mm-hmm. And Pluto is a determining factor to the kind of tone that its transit will be influencing. And so, good example would be the roughly 16 years that Pluto is in Capricorn. We've seen so many structures transform. Pluto went to Capricorn. We had our first Black president at that same basic nexus point. And we've seen politics go in so many extremes since then. And I believe, as a transformational agent, what Pluto did effectively during that time was expose a lot of the corruption, it's always been corrupt, and I don't think that's new information, but I feel like the masses' awareness of just how corrupt and distorted the structures have been. And now that Pluto's going into Aquarius, we're seeing where altruism is kind of the name of the game. It's got to be an all for one and one for all space as a collective. Like, we are all one. Let's go there to the extreme of what an Aquarian age would ascribe to our awareness is it's, one love, etc. And if you think about just how divisive the energies have been in the current, like the holding on, the power grabs, the structures that have been maintained that are so painfully outdated in so many ways. And we can talk patriarchy and we can talk all the different things. And it's not even to look at any one side as right or wrong anymore. It's just like, what?
It's more so about the sides themselves, like polarity.
Right. That there is an oppositional force and energy. And that's actually bringing us back to, to Mars. What's beautiful to know about is that in astrology, there is personal, interpersonal, and transpersonal. And so the personal masculine is the sun, the interpersonal is Mars, and the transpersonal is Pluto. So they are a direct line of masculine energy. And so when we talk about shifting how we're doing masculine energy in the world, Pluto transiting into Aquarius is among a few things that for sure, like, wow, how am I implementing or integrating my relationship to masculine energy? And we each have our own unique relationship and expression of it. But as a frequency, it's yang, it's yin, it's black, it's white, or, it's that quality where we do it with our own unique style. And that's where I love astrology, to better appreciate and objectively witness somebody doing it in a style that might not be my style or one that I even really enjoy, but to them, that's their coherent structure with how they express their masculine or their feminine. And so I think Pluto going into Aquarius was where my long-winded way of saying that we are fundamentally as a planet, collectively for the next 16 years, going into a different generational construct than the previous 16 years that we were in when Pluto was in Capricorn. And that is significant, entering to not just this year, but the next, decade plus.
Yeah, and so there would be so much to dig into in that front, and maybe we'll get there, because I like to get out there and project far into the future. So it always seems nicer than being where I am. But but if we were to shrink that down to what we might see or be invited to feel in these next couple months entering 2025, it seems like that oppositional nature between Mars and Pluto. I don't know if you would categorize thematically that invitation around like how we navigate relationships. Like, I think, like you said, navigating our inner relationship to the masculine, but maybe, since Mars is in the water sign, there's a lot of water. It's like navigating emotional relationships with others, maybe how we relate to the collective as well, but like, how are we expressing our emotions, right? And obviously the elephant in the room would be the recent election and the emotionality that has certainly stirred up, although arguably the emotionality was already there. And all of these recent things, whether it's global conflict, political election or what have you, they're just they're divinely orchestrated landmines placed to elicit the emotionality that's already there, invited to come up so that we can feel it, maybe explode it out, but maybe, just maybe, integrate it and find healthy ways to express and relate to ourselves and others. So with that, Mars retrograde opposition and then going fourth opposition to Pluto, is that, like, would you say that's an invitation to navigate how we're working with masculine energy in relationships?
100%. I mean, again, I wouldn't have said it as beautifully as you just did. So I'll just ding, ding, say yes. I think you nailed it. And, another piece as we kind of move into the year is that Mars is going direct on the 23rd of February. And then on the 1st of March, Venus goes retrograde. So having the 1-2 of our neighboring planets retrograding back to back that way absolutely requires us to reevaluate how we're relating. And more importantly, how we're relating unconsciously. We're not all unconscious all the time, but we're also not all awake all the time either. And what you said, and I think it's relevant as I see it, that with the emotionality of the radical shift in political ideology that's occurring relative to an administration. Our country's still our country, and the divided masses aren't nearly as divided as I believe the propaganda wants to make us believe. And the point in terms of using that as the elephant in the room and saying, well, okay, so that's this perfectly divinely orchestrated landmine of, if I'm triggered by any of it, what's mine to look at? Like, they're acting in accordance with their karmic current on this earth. And if I have a reaction to that, what is mine to look at? Yeah. It doesn't mean that you're wrong for feeling triggered by some of the egregious things that are being expressed or done. And if you're triggered, that's your equanimity getting thrown. That's your work to do. And then B, what's your relationship to it? And for example, let's say the pundits on the other side are out there just lambasting all the horrific things that these new administration or the old administration on either side, and realizing that, does that feed the collective in a positive way, or is it just compounding the problem? And it's just compounding this toxic masculine that is being so highlighted right now based on different movements that are kind of being bolstered by the shift in the political environment. And that's, again, if you feel compelled to step up and express something in relationship to what really is triggering you, fair, but ask yourself first, is it constructive? Is it true? And if it comes down, like, there's a great Sufi axiom. I can't remember if we said this last time, but I've said this a few times in my life. And it's that every thought must cross the threshold of 3 questions before it becomes a spoken word. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Mm. And so I could say a lot about things that I don't agree with, but am I doing it in a way that's constructive? Acknowledging that there's a relevant cultural undercurrent and programming that this human's operating in that doesn't make them evil, but let's address the deeper cultural programming that is so clearly in need of a recalibration. And how can I be part of that recalibration? That's got to be a centric place, not an extreme opposite to then oppose it, because that's just going to be more of the same. So that's a way that I believe when Venus goes retrograde, which it's going to do in Aries, at like 6 degrees Aries on March 1st, it goes back to 23 degrees of Pisces, and it goes direct like April 12th. So that we put Venus in the sign of its detriment, Aries, and then go back into the sign of its exaltation, which is a positive place for Venus in Pisces. I think in general, the invitation really is, am I applying my energy towards a very clear aim that has this universal love construct as its foundation? I'm not here to say you're wrong. I'm here to say there's a better way, and let's work together to figure that out. Or at least I'm going to be on the side of constructively orienting to the things that are so egregious in the ways that they are, but that's just because the old construct is contracting and holding tighter and tighter. And this is what I was realizing recently with the election is this conservative, contracting, controlling movement is far from limited to the United States. It's everywhere. Many countries have gone this direction. And I realized, if we take the organism of planet Earth and we recognize that we, as the mammals that are walking vertical and have our Sushumna, vertical axis, we're channeling the vertical relative to, and this is a study I could reference the study, it's a Gurdjieffian practice, G.I. Gurdjieff, but the idea is that we're vehicles of reciprocal maintenance with divine source energy coming down, as well earth source energy coming up. And so the Anahata chakra being that midpoint where we enter the horizontal plane from a fully integrated, consciously loving space within our being. Mm-hmm. And these 2 planets, Mars, Venus, going retrograde back to back, masculine, feminine, we are coming into a calibration where I feel like this contracting energy is exactly what the diamond needs from the coal to enter that prismic space, the diamond being the Ajna chakra, the third eye, where it is about a wider expanse of consciousness entering the collective. And it's only going to do so with a tightening, contracting energy based on the laws of physics, right? Every action has equal and opposite reactions. The tighter it gets, the more expansive it gets simultaneously, if you recognize and do the practices to correspond with that energy in a conscious way.
Yeah, that's how diamonds are made, I believe, under pressure.
Right.
And
Make it
yeah,
up.
before we go right into, I want to talk about that next phase with Venus, because I can't help but think, oh yeah, my moon is 23 degrees Pisces, and it's just getting hit by all sorts of things. Like, that's going to be such a really potent time. I want to go there next because there's eclipses, there's Saturn, there's like and it's all on my moon. But right before we go there, yeah, I'm thinking of, what you spoke about in terms of political reactivity, and it's like, even, and everyone likely feels they're in alignment. Their opinion is in alignment, that they're doing service. So everyone's gonna feel that what they have to say is really important and really necessary, and they really need to make that Twitter X comment, whatever. And that's their duty in some way. And like, and yet there is this sort of observing awareness of, well, what's the emotional energy that's bringing that forth? Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it shame? Is it projection of blame? Like, because that will just really beget that vibration. And it feels like maybe part of Mars in Cancer and some of the other water signs is like asking us, and maybe Mercury too in retrograde, asking us to revise, even if we believe we're right, and we believe that we're on the right side of history, and we believe that, we're the good guys. How are you going about modeling that, serving that, channeling that, speaking that, if it's really meant to be spoken? And that's, it reminds me of the idea of advocacy, right? There's nothing wrong with being an activist, but it does it does invite reflection as to how you channel that advocacy. Is it through burning things down, or is it through, kindness and compassion? It's kind of, I'd say we're all definitely being invited to look at how we're modeling and expressing and channeling that. And so then, as we step forth from that, this beginning period we've been talking about, into, because I was reminded that there's going to be some powerful eclipse, and I know because I'd been seeing my own chart and what's going to get lit up, like, that I'm going through, with my moon and Saturn, and it's just like, and the north, it seems like a crazy eclipse, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I think like those eclipses, it's going to be like Saturn conjunct that, whatever it is, maybe the sun will be there in North Node, I think, and all like in Pisces, just like crazy. So I'm curious, and I guess Venus will be right there too. So
Yeah.
like, how would you talk about that eclipsean invitation in the early stages of 2025?
And I'm trying to find the date here. I appreciate you bringing it up. As I'm pulling it up in my little system here.
Yeah, I think it's like end of February, early March.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's amazing is I'll step ahead of that just because it's in front of me, and I'll go back to the eclipse. As I mentioned, that it's on the 12th of April that Mercury goes direct, which it'll be exactly conjunct Saturn in Pisces and the North Node.
Oh my
And
God.
Mercury is right there as well. So and then Neptune has just gone into Aries.
Right. It's so much right there.
I mean, as you mentioned earlier, like, who knows when this little roller coaster ride's going to slow down, but it's not in 2025 is this
Right.
short.
Yeah.
And if at all, if it ever does, but it's certainly going to continue forward. And I think what's relevant now, and I think this actually will set us up for the eclipse, the more these energies amplify and the more the structures destabilize, the more energy is available.
Yeah, right.
And so, as you said it beautifully a minute ago, it's like, am I coming at this from fear, from anger? And the truth is, back to the original conversation about the higher mind that we're being invited to access now, is if you maintain a very real aim and you see that energy is becoming more and more available
Yeah, like the
because
bow, like stringing the bow back. Yeah.
so it's like, where am I aiming? What is my vision? And we can pull in, Joe Dispenza's work's a great example of working in the quantum field and saying, all right, if we're being informed now based on this interpretation that more energy is going to avail itself, it's kind of like, all right, if your bank account's about to get 7 figures, where are you going to invest it if you're told that that bank account won't just sit there forever, so you have to put it
Gonna have
somewhere?
to go somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the basic awareness now, is that we're going to have Jupiter go direct, which it's currently retrograde. That's going to happen in the spring as well, just before the equinox, I believe. And so we're going to
Uranus will go direct around that time probably.
yeah, I mean, by at least by the time that I'm looking at when Venus goes direct. When Venus goes direct on the 12th of April, there won't be a single planet retrograde. And that's always
So all that energy the bow will be ready to release in
right.
whatever direction we've been aiming it.
Right. And I think, and if you're in right relationship, if you take a basic Buddhist tenet around being in right relationship, right alignment, and the idea being that you're not taking and you're not overtaking, over giving, you're just in a coherent relationship with the field around you, the people around you. And there's not the unconscious karmic patterns playing out, which is ours to check when they do, right?
For sure.
And
yeah.
I'm just going back to the eclipse to get it set up. We have this unique opportunity. This is, to use the words of Viktor Frankl, that between stimulus and response, there's a space. And it's that space that the retrogrades are really inviting us to just sit in and realize, wow, if I'm clear in my intention, I'm clear in my aim, let's say I'm with my partner and love is the aim. And love has a myriad of expressions, and I could, love languages and whatever. And the idea is that if that's my aim, and yet they do something that is just triggering the F out of me, then what is my task? If my aim is love and I'm now being triggered with oppositional energy, that is actually the exact energy we need to bring us like, oh, wow, I needed to actually go so fully into not loving just a reflection of me, but the actual being that they are, and loving them so fully that they get to be that without pushback. Then it harmonizes the entire field. And that's obviously easier said than done. I'm far from mastering that one myself. But the idea being that really at the end of the day, it's having a clear aim, having a very clear, deliberate intention around what I want to do with this energy. Where do I want to invest it? What do I want to create with it? And then putting action behind that. And that's the kind of fun part of Mars retrograde, where it's doing things differently than we normally would. Even if it's the same thing, just doing it differently.
Yeah.
And let's get to this eclipse now. Because, I mean, and to your point on eclipses, at every new moon, they invite us, we're invited to set intentions based on the potency of the sun and moon coming together. That is our inner masculine and feminine. So for those that practice yoga, like Hatha yoga, Ha is sun, Tha is moon. So yoga is the yoking or union of the two. And so you're just doing a practice where you're harmonizing the hemispheres of your brain, your relationship to these polarities, and to then take an eclipse, which for the technical understanding of it is the nodal points of the moon, which are points in relationship to the moon's orbit around the sun, that is a corresponding point in the sky relative to that orbit. When the moon and the sun are conjunct the south and north node, that is when they're in a direct corresponding relationship to the sun. I should say it's where Earth is in a direct corresponding relationship with the moon and the sun, where Earth is in a direct alignment. We're on a full solar eclipse. Earth is blocking the sun, the moon is blocking the sun completely from Earth. And so we actually see that, the dark night of a solar eclipse, which is brilliant if you've ever seen one. And then the full moon is when the Earth is blocking, a lunar eclipse. The full moon is when the Earth is blocking the sun. And so then the moon gets that dark shadow over it. It's that perfect circumference, which is just the brilliance of the geometry of our entire universe.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like there are any coincidences there.
Right, exactly. And that's the beauty of it. And you start looking at things like Carl Jung would talk about synchronicity, and just following the sparkling synchronicities and realizing that there is actually a guide, a destiny, a current, that when you're in that flow state, and the people you meet and the conversations you have, and then the connections that are made are outside the realm of our own personal conjuring, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's go with the lunar eclipse. So the lunar eclipse is, yeah, this is a full on, the nodes are within a 4 degree orb. So that puts it very tight. That's where we're like,
Yeah.
some eclipses you can see a partial covering. This will be an almost total. It actually will be total, I'm sure, in certain like bandwidths of the Earth,
Yeah.
which that can be looked up. So let's just start with the lunar eclipse on the 13th. And so we're going to be in the 10, 12 days into the Venus retrograde. We're building towards the equinox. The sun is conjunct Saturn. And it's noteworthy that any planet that the sun transits, right? So 365 days, the sun's going to go all the way around. That's our lunar calendar year. And the sun will be exactly conjunct Saturn on this eclipse. So a lunar eclipse, again, is a full moon. Solar eclipse is a new moon. So you've got the moon in Virgo conjunct the south node, opposing the sun, conjunct Saturn, conjunct the north node in Pisces, along with Neptune in its final days of being in Pisces. It's a lot of feminine.
Yeah, I had to look, I typed it in for my chart and I had just have to interrupt and say, so that eclipse is directly conjunct my moon. So it's 20, my moon is 23 degrees Pisces. And this is, if, if I did this right, the sun is at 23 degrees
Yeah,
and
treasury
Saturn
that.
is at 22 degrees and the nodes are like,
Oh, it's
so
yeah. This is opposing your moon.
yeah, the moon is opposing my moon. Right. And all those planets are conjunct my moon. Yeah.
Conjunct, precisely. Yeah, and you know, we've talked about it. I think we talked a little bit about last time. You had mentioned, Saturn's currently right at the IC, the idiom coli at the very bottom, the nadir of the chart, and then it's going to be, you're going to go into a 14-year cycle of Saturn on an upswing, which we like. The last 14 years has been the downswing, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's a
Interesting.
building time. This has been a breaking down time, and now you're in a building time, right?
Right.
The potency of a Saturn transiting the moon. One of my teachers told me is like second only to the Saturn
I
return.
remember. Yeah.
Is
Exciting. Oh,
yeah,
oh, and also it is square my natal Saturn because my natal Saturn is 25 degrees. So.
yeah. So being born with a moon square Saturn has its and has a relationship to authority, to parents, mother, father, both. But mom tends to usually be the bigger nugget to chew on. But in general, you look at houses and signs, we'll say that. But the basic gist of this eclipse, relative to your chart, but also for everybody else, is you take the Piscean energy and the simple fact that, Saturn's going to be moving out of Pisces and into Aries at some point this year. I don't know the date, but we can look it up.
Yeah.
And we are, all of us, I believe, connecting to a deeper or being invited to connect with spirit, with what that actually means, where there's something outside of ourselves. And I always drop into the more altruistic nature of the Aquarian mentality, but also the Jupiterian or Sagittarian kind of engagement of, a great line that I love from Mahatma Gandhi was, if you want to, or the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. And the idea there is that's more of a Virgo kind of trait, to be in the service of others per se, but that's also Saturnian at its root. Saturn as an archetype is you can hear words like disciplinarian and authority and Lord of Karma, but it's also about authenticity and authority. Those are the two elements I find Saturn to be most relevant to connect with. So Saturn isn't this evil thing that's making all things hard. It's like, no, Saturn demands that we be in our authority and will kick us where it hurts when we're not being authentic.
Yeah.
And authenticity is way easier said than done in situations where default patterns and dynamics are at play, especially with family, right? And where those instituted ways of being perceived are pretty firmly rooted in the other, and therefore to be other than that is a very strong task. And so, because the center of gravity keeps pulling you back to the way they're holding you versus who you really truly are. And so the idea here is, with this much Pisces, it's kind of like giving way, like not my will, but thy will be done. Like there is this, I'm not going to go religious on it. It's more around an access point to an infinite energy that we are, all of us, animated by and ultimately aspire to be fully connected with outside of our ego selves. And I believe that this particular eclipse with the moon in Virgo, which is, by the way, conjunct your Mercury.
Right. Yeah. I didn't even mention all the other stuff. Like, right, it's a crazy axis for me.
You got a pretty, you're just barely out of being in a strong T-square. You're in a T-square, excuse me, but the grand square, rather. So I was going to say, like, the T-square's there.
Oh, yeah.
And for those that are listening, like, a T-square is just two planets opposing each other. In this case, in Daniel's chart, it's Mercury opposing the moon. Both of them are squaring his
Saturn and Uranus because they're conjunct. So yeah, it's crazy.
Jesus, you got a chart, bro. But it's brilliant. It's brilliant. This is the thing about
brilliant. Yeah, that's what I say all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Tell everybody else, please. No, the whole thing about having Mercury in Virgo and the Sun and then Virgo to midheaven is you can see an order to things that most people can't see, and that's what makes you a gifted therapist and a gifted communicator in general, because you're able to orient information and connect dots that others aren't able to necessarily connect or see. But back to the whole like full moon lunar eclipse that we're going into on this the 13th of March. The Venus, like I said, will still be in its retrograde, and it's going to be going back into Pisces and joining Saturn as the sun moves away from Saturn. And I just feel like it's a connecting to authority that is so rooted in our connection to something greater than ourselves. So it's not like
a conditioned personal, and maybe it ties back a little bit to how we started our conversation, that masculine energy, the way we attempt to sort of take and play out authority in a kind of forced and controlling manner. This is not what's being asked. This is like a higher authority, almost like I don't know if you would call it like a surrendering to a greater authority than these conditioned personal selves.
I totally agree with that, and I think even in the landscape of the world, where there will be a different authoritarian position being taken across the globe.
Yeah.
In whether it's in opposition to the US or the other, it's like all of that's happening in the earthly plane, as I said, is this contracting energy that's taking us as a species, as a conscious being, to a heightened awareness of something greater. And so I'm not one to make many predictions, but I won't be surprised if there is a lot of contractive energy in the world that's basically inviting, if not almost requiring us to
shift the lens of authority, or who's holding power in some ways.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think of whether it was the movement in India or any nonviolent protest that simply will rise up against and not succumb to, let's say, hitting back, even though the hit might very well come. As it did, let's say, in the civil rights movement, for example, where they just consistently were arrested and beat down, but they continued to march.
Because it's like a Piscean energy, right?
Right.
Like,
exactly. Yeah. Naming it. So, we are as a collective moving into this age of Aquarius, and that's been talked about for many years. And I do believe in the Piscean age is what we're evolving out of. And one could argue this mass concentration of Piscean energy before Saturn finishes its time there and moves out of Pisces for the next 28 plus years. That and Pluto going into Aquarius feels like, oh wow, we're now going into a space where Saturn goes into Aries and forms a really nice sextile to Pluto. That's a great aspect. And Saturn Pluto aspects, as well as Saturn Uranus aspects, have consistently been demarcations of war and turbulence on the planet when they go into stronger, less harmonious aspects. But sextile is very harmonious. And Richard Tarnish wrote a book, Cosmos and Psyche, which is arguably the most brilliant book on astrology I'm not even fully done with it. It's a massive freaking encyclopedia, but it's so brilliantly written. And this is a Harvard PhD historian who looked to debunk astrology.
Yeah.
And realized what better metric to do that than to take history and transits that are allegedly going to create these? And he tracked it so far back and so in depth that he realized this is a valid approach to perceiving reality, and there are historical reference points throughout that. And then he became an expert astrologer. This is the chief of this guys. Yeah. So, but that, to say that, I think, you know, we're coming into a fuller understanding, at least I am, around just how concentrated this is going to be. And the invitation is really, you know, connect into practices now, be consistent, stay within them, and the capacity to navigate what could feel a lot less comfortable or more contracted energetically could expand consciousness, will, I believe, expand consciousness for those who are willing to put the effort in on the front end, because Saturn doesn't give us anything. We have to work for it. But when we do put in the effort and the discipline, extraordinary things are going to come with this eclipse. Let's look at the next one.
It feels like it's, I don't know if you would call it the most potent month of 2025, but it's certainly, or of the last couple of years, I don't know. It just feels like such a potent month, March.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you know, Mars is still in the thick of Cancer, and it's conjunct your Venus, by the way, during this lunar eclipse.
Oh yeah, great. More.
That's a great conjunction, though. We like Mars.
Yeah. That sounds good.
So what we have on the 29th of March, it is a solar eclipse, but it's going to be a partial. The lunar eclipse is the big dog as far as
the big one.
Yeah, it's on fact. Yeah, and this is no less relevant because by this point we've come back to another Mercury retrograde.
Never ends. Astrology.
Always something. But what's great though is you know, we're in the spring equinox, vernal equinox, and we're going to have both Venus. This is where Venus is retrograding back to Saturn. It's in late Pisces. Then the new moon solar eclipse is going to be at 9 degrees of Aries. So it's out of its 10-degree orb, but it's not far away. And what's really nice about the solar eclipse is all the aspects in the sky, literally there's the only aspects are sextiles and a trine between Mars and Saturn. So those are all harmonious aspects. One could argue that the energy on the Earth at the time isn't necessarily going to be all that combative or aggressive.
like whatever transpires in maybe leading up to March and then through March, collectively and personally, like, it looks astrologically like there might be some, I don't know if resolution is the right word, but rebalancing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Venus is retrograde, Mercury's retrograde during this window. So it kind of comes down to while there's going to be some personal, it's not going to be so global, would be like my hope at least.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a hard thing to predict, and I'm not going to
I won't hold you to it.
But I will say that in general, we like the sun in Aries in general. You know, it's the beginning of a new cycle, a new year.
It's like the first sign. You know. Yeah,
exactly. So it's our first new moon of this solar year as opposed to our Gregorian calendar year, and so I
kind of like the new year. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I always think the equinox feels more appropriate to feel the momentous wave of intentions taking root and as we plant seeds in the spring, right? So that's the kind of mentality around it. And but yeah, with both Mercury and Venus retrograde, the thing that's important to know when those two are retrograde together is those two planets being the inner planets before Earth relative to our solar system is that they translate the sun's energy, the divine source energy that is the sun is translated. And so if both the planets through which it's translated are retrograde, it lends itself to a lot of like even less predictable insights, or, you know, like I didn't even see that coming, but there's my ex-girlfriend came back to town and you know, and I'm not going to draw any of these scenarios out, but you can't predict it, and it's going to be surprising for sure. And the beauty of it is with Venus in Pisces, where it's exalted, I just feel like everything is going to keep drawing us back to a level of connection to source that I believe we all aspire to, even if we're, of the atheist perspective, there is a return to something greater than the self that will occur. And that doesn't have to have an iconography or any name associated, but there's a
maybe we get, I don't know, maybe we get some more UFO sightings or things that just bring us to something elsewhere.
like the second coming again.
Yeah, yeah. Christ, I don't know.
It's going to be interpreted through the lens of our programming, and so if that is the narrative that you're living into, then that is what you'll perceive, right?
Yeah. Okay, we got quite a bit to look forward to. So we don't have to go too far out into this because I know we have some other things to chat about. But the last thing I'll ask is how you might see then, because I know that following this really potent time we just scratched the surface of, like, yeah, so there is a lot of energy moving out of Pisces or shortly moving out of Pisces. And then I know there are some other big planets changing signs too. Like I know Uranus is going to change signs, Jupiter's going to at some point. So
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, and then Neptune, Saturn moving into Aries. So if you could generally, how would you speak to that shift of the dynamics there, all sort of changing signs, moving out of this huge Piscean wave of whatever is going to emerge there and sort of carry forth?
I mean, it'd make more sense to break them each down individually, but in general, just for the sake of time, it's just going to be a radical tectonic shift in priorities. And
yeah, it's each going to they're each going to have implications in their own.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if we were just like to draw it, we'll go from the outside in. So Neptune as a planet is this kind of psychic cosmic dreamer dissolving energy, right? So the way they like to say it, like Uranus breaks down the structure that Saturn maintains, Neptune dissolves it, and then Pluto transforms it anew, and we start over. And so
I like that.
yeah, and so that like that transpersonal energetic of like, let's say you or I or one of our clients encounters a childhood trauma and suddenly forms a new relationship to something they didn't even realize they were holding on to. Maybe they remembered it for the first time, and then were able to find a way to integrate it, claim authority, reclaim themselves through the integration of that trauma. That's kind of like the Uranus, whoa, didn't see that coming. Oh my God, that happened when I was 12. Oh God. And then Neptune's dissolving it and saying, this is all part of your own evolutionary process, integrating, forgiving, reclaiming, etc. And then Pluto's like, and now what are you going to do with it? Let's do something powerful. Let's fulfill on the Dharma you came here to fulfill on. That's kind of the way I would describe it. And
I love that. Yeah, I've never heard that before.
And I've never said it before, you and I.
Oh, that's amazing.
So, and as I'm looking at it, like Neptune going into Aries. Now, Neptune's the ruler of Pisces. It spent, I think, like 14 or some odd years in Pisces. And now that it's going into Aries, that's a big shift. And I believe that's going to be us claiming an authority with faculties of our psyche or our intuitive faculties. I believe all of us have these paranormal, supernormal, supernatural abilities. And it's going to be a question of putting them to use, applying them, owning them, allowing, you can tell me that I'm supposed to go left, but if my intuition says right, I'm going right.
Yeah. Like really integrating these capacities in like a real physical way.
Yeah, exactly. And Uranus is this rebellious force. I'm not sure when it's going. It's not going. Let me find out before we name it, because Uranus isn't going until later in the year, but it's going to be relevant. It's going to go into Gemini, July. Okay, so middle of the year. Yeah. So Uranus goes into Gemini with Venus. By the way, that's going to be fun.
Oh wow!
It goes into Gemini,
and I'll make a personal note. That is my descendant. That is because I'm a 000 Sagittarius rising. So it's my descendant, 7th house, and then my Jupiter is right there as well at 4 degrees.
Well, the fun part of that, I mean, this is like, it's going to change your whole, I don't want to say change your whole life, but
relational life,
exactly.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it's like, but how you relate. I mean, it's going to bring so much unexpected stuff, but the power is, again, coming back to your intention. It's like, it's just energy and it's just resource. So where are you going to apply it? But that third quadrant is the most developmental quadrant of them all, because you're in the upper hemisphere and you're on the ascending arc. So as I mentioned, Saturn going at the bottom, you're going to be going up, but it's still a personal development.
And just to clarify, like you're talking about the quadrants of the housing system. Is that
correct?
Right? Yeah.
1, 2, 3, and 4. And so houses 1, 2, 3 are the first quadrant, and so forth. And so, as I was saying, with your Saturn being right at the end of your first
at the bottom, yeah,
and it's going on an ascending arc.
Yeah.
Well, the next
building new things, yeah.
It's building new things, but it's still going to be more of an internal job because it's still at the bottom hemisphere of the chart. But in this case, Uranus, it's at the top hemisphere while ascending, which means, choose your weapon and use it wisely, because you're going to have a lot of energy coming through, and it's just like being very clear about how you want to direct it. Like more so, we're all going to have all this energy, but specific to your chart, that's a major pulse point of energy coming in through the Western hemisphere, and it's coming with Venus. And you're like, look, if you want to be married, I wouldn't be surprised if that transit pulls somebody in that you would never have dreamt possible. And lo and behold, the journey begins, because that's the level of Uranus in the 7th house is just going to be, it'll be in your 7th house for, good few years. But with Venus, entering with Venus feels very auspicious to me. So anyway, that's Uranus going into Gemini. So I'll just name that. We've had so many earthly, like whether it's the climate collapse or change, or however you want to refer to it, whether it's the structures on the earth, whether it's wind and solar and different things that are like coming online. AI is a great example as well.
Yes, right.
Of this radical shift and change in our earthly program. And that's Uranus's domain. And then it's going to go into Gemini, which to me feels like the change is going to be even more rapid, but it's also going to be more about mind and more about communication, less about earthly, the simple fact that AI is going to be taking over whatever percentage of jobs it already has and will continue, and what it's doing. And now we're looking at the planet that would basically oversee that movement going into a new sign, the shift into Gemini. I think we're going to have a lot more access to a lot more faculties. I come back to that again.
There's like a lot of threads to pull there about like higher mind, telepathy, communication on a whole new level kind of thing. Yeah.
I think that's absolutely relevant. Yeah. It feels like maybe you read my graphic novel, because did you read my graphic novel?
I you know what? When I was like preparing a little bit, I was like, oh, I got to get I didn't get your book yet. I got to get it.
Yeah. I'll send you a copy, man. Just give me your address. It's, but we, our characters communicate telepathically, and it's illustrating a lot of what seems to be happening right now. But anyway, that's Uranus into Gemini. And then the last one you'd mentioned, Jupiter's going to go into Cancer. That's before this, though. That's actually earlier. And then we'll leave it there for now.
And while you're doing that, like, because Pluto going into Aquarius, Uranus is like the planetary ruler of Aquarius, right? So like Pluto in Aquarius, Uranus in Gemini, that feels like a potent combination.
Yeah, no, for sure. They're both air signs. They're going to be in a nice trine with each other. That all.
So a lot of air energy.
Yeah. Which, if I was going to, as I sit here and contemplate that, I think, wow, it's just going to feel like, in a sense,
so much stimulation and like electricity, maybe.
Well, intelligence, and it's actually electricity for sure. I just feel like we're going to like the mind getting turned on. I was watching some, Instagram ad comes across my feed, and this guy is talking about L-theanine, and if you know what that is, it's basically calms and allows
like in green tea, and
it allows us to process caffeine with less spike and happiness and more relaxation, and I feel like that is an analogy really for we're about to get a full dose of expanded capacity in our intellectual centers, and like the telepathy, things like that. I wholeheartedly believe that's in our capacity, and not even our future here. And then let's see, Jupiter was the last one. June 9th is when Jupiter goes into Cancer, and it's going to do so with Mercury, interestingly enough. Mercury will just be going into Cancer along with it. And you know, as I talked about Mars and Cancer and emotion and intuition, and Jupiter being kind of like this higher mind element, I do think that coming back to intuition is a big one. And
Yeah.
especially with Mercury there too, it feels like people I know, like charts that I've read with Mercury and Cancer, their cognitive faculties are so uniquely connected to their intuitive awareness. And I find it to be really, I think, what that Jupiter transit is going to be about more so. So yeah, if I was going to summarize all this, it's like we're at such a unique window now to be in preparation for these things that are on the horizon. Great example is there are ways to develop psychic ability or intuitive faculties, or this isn't just a concept and then okay, I'm going to just sit back and wait for it to happen.
Right. Yeah, there's practice.
Yeah, and it like if you want to develop these things, there are ways to do so. I don't have those resources right now, but in general, you can find them, and in that way, I believe those are areas we will be wise to put some attention and develop it's kind of like, oh, I'm moving to Spain in 6 months. I should probably start studying Spanish now so that when I get there, I'm not lost.
And what it elicits in me, actually, the first sort of association I made was I saw the commercial for the new like Google phone, and their AI is called Gemini. So I find that, of course, quite resonant. And also what strikes me is like with all the even more influence around the advancement and development of technologies, of AI, things like that, it also seems like we're going to be invited to prioritize our highest technology, which you might consider to be intuition, because we obviously have very complex cognitive minds, but I mean, that's no match for, AI necessarily, or the supercomputer, but what we have to offer and what we're guided to, steep into is the intuitive capacity that connects to a higher universal mind.
We are effectively quantum computers in our highest and most centered expression, right? So while quantum computing is another technology that's, on the horizon here, and to appreciate, like you just named it, I won't be able to write up a legal summary as fast as chat GPT by a long shot. And yet we are in this, if you take Ray Kurzweil's work in the singularity and the idea that we are this, biology and technology are hybridizing themselves at a very accelerated pace. And there's plenty of now, I think, evidence to support that statement. And that was a prediction made back in the 90s. And now we're in a space, as you say that, my thought is, well, we aren't going to stop this train. It's happening.
Yeah.
And we don't know what that actually means for the future of humanity as a species. We really don't know what our physical reality is going to be, but our consciousness will remain. There's no question. Like, energy cannot be neither destroyed nor created, right? So it's going to go somewhere, and we have a multidimensional capacity. And this again is back to my graphic novel, where it's about transition into the multiverse and a more 5D level of awareness. And so the 5-dimensional awareness, which is what a lot of the woke kids or whatever are saying.
Yeah, I know.
The idea is that we are literally evolving into a new version of Homo sapiens. I don't know I think there are many terms for that now. But
that just elicits in me, like, it really does feel to me that the new generation of kids are going to be like a different species. Like, they're coming in with different wiring, different vibration, there's going to be so many more psychic kids. It's just going to be a different, I think.
Yeah. And that's why we'll track this now down to a conversation about food as well. But if you look at the children and their unique abilities as you're describing, and mind you, Pluto is the demarcation from one generation to the next, from Gen X to the millennials and so
Oh,
forth.
interesting. I didn't know that either.
Yeah, it corresponds. I don't know that the day
Yeah,
exact, but to
right.
that, Pluto and Aquarius, like you said, the ones coming in now, the beings that are coming onto Earth now, from the great beyond or wherever they're coming
Yeah,
from,
wherever they come from.
you're right. I believe they're going to have an entirely different blueprint and circuit board to correspond with information and energy. And one thing that part of my mission has been with respect to the obscene amounts of ADHD, autism,
Yeah, right. So that
is how to
corresponds. Yeah.
the gut biome. Like, wait a second, what is disrupting the metabolic process? What is disrupting the endocrine system, and the ability to effectively process not only just information, but then food, energy, the body. And so, we I have a company called Living Prana, and Living Prana, we developed these superfood pancake and waffle mixes that are something I've eaten almost every day for the last 3 years. And what I've noticed is I've calibrated my gut biome to a level where I can more comfortably deal with life, I guess, because my cognitive faculties are not in any way disrupted because my gut biome is back to a steady, healthy existence, right? And so working with superfoods, adaptogens, I mentioned L-theanine a minute ago as an amino acid, and these this whole movement I see is, as far as, like, I think the percentage of obese kids now is like 50% of children in our country are obese. And if you're not tracking Casey and Callie means at all, they're doing amazing work in really putting on notice these companies that are toxifying our world, from the Monsantos and Roundups and DuPonts and chemicals and all that, but also then the food system and the fact that most ultra processed food is one of the primary culprits for all the metabolic imbalances and diseases and cancers, and so prominent and growing in our world, and calling out the pharmaceutical system for how, we'll just call it corrupt, but the idea being that there's this system of, get them sick, require them to take medicines that are going to be, they'll be on the rest of their lives, and everybody's making money, but at the expense of poisoning humanity. What's that about? And that's the deeper, darker question that I really appreciate is at play, is what is our profit motive as a kind of consumptive species, right? And you have to read my graphic novel, because the medicine
I'm
gate talks
going to.
about disease. It's a whole thing. But how do we course correct it? How can we steer the ship in a direction personally? And so in this case, what we did with Living Prana was just this experience of, we figured out combinations of superfoods, adaptogens, functional mushrooms that are going to give the body the chance it needs to do the practices we're talking about, to be able to sit comfortably in meditation, or to practice whatever form of meditation one does with greater metabolic process and health. That is really, I think, key right now, because whether we're going to be in these bodies for, our human body is going to exist 100 years from now, I'm very curious. It's possible we'll be transitioned into some other form of expression as a life form, given the rapid pace that we're accelerating. But in the meantime, we're still here and we still have to eat. Now it's like, what are we putting in our bodies? And that is, we can talk about emotions, as we talked about earlier, and how many of our emotions are being disrupted because our hormones are out of balance, because our diets are so outside the realms of the whole foods that we need to be processing regularly. And that's me segging it deliberately to this whole kind of full circle of practicing, learning, taking new things. And the best thing that I could recommend anybody do is evaluate your diet right now. You want to do things differently, start with how you're feeding the organism that is going to do the things you want to do, and the mind that has to cognize and establish how to do it. And that all starts with a healthy gut at the end of the day.
Yeah, let's shift gears into that a bit, because it's such an important topic. I mean, it is. It's like, in some ways, it's one of the core foundations of our being in this physical world, is what we put into these bodies. Um, And as you mentioned, you are not just an astrologer or a bodyworker or writer. You also have this company and this passion um, for healthy living. And as we talked about in the last podcast, your journey through health and also as I've talked about my journey through health and we were just talking about that a little bit before we started recording. But like, there are so many layers to health, which both of us are interested in pretty much all of those layers. But one of
Yeah.
the key players is the microbiome. And it is, it's trendy now. It's a trendy thing to talk about microbiome and gut health. But actually I feel the trendiness of it is catching up to something that's always been there. And whether it's in the more psychological fields of like gut brain connection, because the gut produces like 95% plus of our neurotransmitters. So there's tons of implications for our emotional well-being and then for diagnoses and everything like that, and then also the vagus nerve, so tons of implications for the stress response and how, right, so it's like across the board. It's also the solar plexus chakra, which I feel is a lot really related to when we talk about inner child healing and where the early life trauma is like held. So much of it, at least for me, feels resonant in being held and stored in that gut area. And I've personally had a lot of gut issues most of my life, and I have a Jewish lineage, and some stereotypes are true. There is like a lot of gut stuff through that lineage. So, and then you add in what you mentioned about younger generations or generations of the past 20, 30 years, and just the rampant increase in diagnoses and disorders,
Yeah.
surrounding just like really, I guess what we might just call like brain wiring or like brain coherence, like, whether it's autism spectrums, ADHD spectrums, blah, blah, blah. I'm like pretty much on all the spectrums myself. And it's like, I think it has, there's a lot of things it's led to. Like it's led to a lot of, I think, compassion for the word now is neurodivergence, right? Like just sort of like differentness, which I think is really beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of that because I'm part of it, I'm part of that spectrum, and I like to expand the spectrum further into neurodivergence into some of these other capacities we're talking about, right? Like, what's the correlation between being on the autistic spectrum and being clairvoyant? It's like I'm interested in that integration, so we're gonna see how that plays out. But one thing I feel is that it's one thing to develop, great amounts of compassion and acceptance and creating new possibilities and accessibility for being different. But it's another thing to also recognize that we can heal some of these things. Like it's okay to want to heal. It's not like diminishing our differentness. It's just acknowledging that like these are disruptive things that we're collectively experiencing, a lot of young people. And so that without it's a nuanced path without like dismissing or judging um you know the the newer generations who are sort of coming in differently wired. We can also look to ways to bring ourselves more deeply into alignment with health, with coherence. And one of probably the most important is food. And this, we obviously, probably, especially in America, live in a um, pretty rough, I don't know, food landscape. It's just like, and I think it's just becoming more and more obvious. Maybe that's one of the things that's just being more and more uncovered and spoken about in the, in the collective, in the media landscape and public opinion is like how distorted and manipulated it is. And so, yeah, I'd love for you to just speak a little bit more about living prana. Maybe I know how it came to be, but your partnership with Brian and like just the impetus for that and yeah, maybe where you see that going.
Well, thank you. Let's see. I mean, we came together in a really profound way. We were both on an ayahuasca dieta,
Yeah, I
and
remember that. Yeah.
yeah, so that meeting point was very rich in our both of our healing journeys to have met in that way. And then to have discussed the prana cakes and the brain cakes that I had created, but didn't have the business acumen to really develop into what it now is.
Did the idea come under the medicine, or is that already being formulated?
Well, so prana cakes were created at Burning Man, and I told you that story, right? I don't know if that was on our last podcast, but anyway, this story is just, I mean, I have a history, a Chinese medical background, so herbology has always been in my wheelhouse of So I just knew what my body needed to basically recalibrate after over a week in the desert and being depleted. And so I combined a combination of superfoods and adaptogens. And without the blender, because I'm in my trailer at Burning Man, I've got a cooking stove and a pancake mix, threw it together, and that was prana cakes. And then we've since augmented it and developed it into what it is today. And that was the origin story. And then brain cakes were just my avenue of getting off of caffeine and coffee, and realizing that was an unhealthy choice for me to be making.
And that's with more adaptogenic like properties, is that?
Different set of adaptogens and functional mushrooms and superfood as well. And so those two had been developed. And then when I met Brian, we recognized a kinship and a brotherhood. And then shortly thereafter, I called him and said, hey, a mutual friend of ours said, you should, A, he knew I was trying to bring these things to market, and B, he's like, you should just talk to Brian. It was instant and obvious that we were here to do this together. And so shortly thereafter, we realized, we were trying to formulate it just right to get it ready for production. And we were at the time using brown rice flour and white rice flour. And both of us, after about 4 days, were inflamed and bloated and constipated. Like, wait a second, something's going on here. So we went down the rabbit hole of understanding what grains do in general in the body, processed grains. And so we reverse engineered, came back to the root, realized we got to take these flours out, tried a bunch of different ones, landed on buckwheat as this nutrient dense, not a grain, nor does it have any gluten. It's actually a seed in the rhubarb family. Got this wonderful, non-aggravating, non-allergen for the vast majority. There are a few people who do have an allergen to buckwheat, but relative to others, it's the best kind of universally digestible for most constitutions source of nutrient dense flour. And then an arrowroot was the other flour that we landed with to give it this consistency and keep it vegan and congeal it together. And then just a bunch of superfoods and adaptogens and functional mushrooms, in this case for the brain cakes, that are about cognitive enhancement, memory, focus, stress reduction. And so, because the real truth about focus, for those who don't know, is that, let's say I'm going to drink coffee because I think it's going to give me this like hyper focused, vigilant, or Adderall or whatever. And that's its own narrative. But the idea is that we are better focused and more capable of concentrating and developing, or I should say memorizing or remembering what we're learning when we're in a very parasympathetic, relaxed nervous system. And so that's what those ingredients, some of the ingredients within.
So if you're, needless to say, if you're taking amphetamines and drinking high amounts of stimulants, it's going to disrupt things a little bit.
Well, a lot, unfortunately. And that's no conversation. I mean, you talk about sleep in relationship to those substances. And that's the thing that also really got me is Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, completely just sparked me into an awareness of the neurochemistry of what caffeine does, which, for those who don't know, is it occupies your adenosine receptors, so that when your body starts to release melatonin to say, hey, we're ready for some shutdown, those receptors in the brain have nowhere for the melatonin to land because the caffeine is occupying it. So that's how it works. And caffeine has a 5 to 7 hour half-life, So it's basically 12 hours in your system. And so they say, if you are going to drink caffeine, you want to curb that at 11, because even if you fall asleep on caffeine, and this is what really got me, because I could fall asleep. I could have a cup of coffee in the afternoon, still fall asleep at 10 o'clock at night. But what happens is you're not going to get the REM and NREM, deeper sleep, where your brain, your entire system recalibrates, and you literally have an ability to register information, offload what doesn't matter, what's irrelevant. And I'm reading all of this, and I'm just like, oh my God. So I might believe I'm getting quality sleep, but the truth is, even the sleep I'm getting may not be the longevity enhancing, because that's the thing. There's no better biohack than a good night's sleep, right? And so understanding that was where I went down the rabbit hole of going into the nootropics and functional mushrooms and understanding better how to give myself that morning routine and stimulus that I love without caffeine and coffee in general. And so, or caffeine in general, but coffee was my way at the time. And so that was kind of how it came about. And then, I also, one part we hadn't talked about, I had a traumatic brain injury when I was 36, my Saturn square.
Oh, wow. Oh, great.
Crazy.
Well, I'm going through mine now, so.
Squaring Pluto in my natal chart. So it was Saturn conjunct my Pluto, squaring my natal Saturn.
Oh my God. Wow.
And yeah, it's a much longer story and not nearly as it's colorful, but it's not, I'll just tell it. I fell through a glass table in Vegas, lost a piece of my face, had to go through rehabilitation. But the process was also realizing my cognitive faculties were not what I had previously.
And that's interesting, because you'd gone through a couple iterations of not being in alignment with your cognitive faculties with the mold exposed. So there were just a lot of things with your mind. Yeah.
I mean, I've got Gemini rising, and I was born with Mercury retrograde and Scorpio. So yeah, I've gone down some deep, dark psychological portals but to understand, to your point too, these are maladies or disorders or imbalances that, while we aren't going to shame anyone, there are ways to work with and course correct and harmonize and balance some of this stuff. And even something as severe as a traumatic brain injury and having that level of impact, but finding a current of harmony subsequent to that with the right approach, the right supplementation in this case, as well as the right practices. And that's the thing that I love what you brought up earlier, is not shaming anybody for their uniqueness, but also recognizing that it is disruptive. And if it is disruptive and you want to do something about it, there are approaches you can take. And to your point about like the 95% of our transmitters and the serotonin in our belly and the feel good chemicals that we get are directly correspondent to eating a clean diet and having a gut biome that does have the healthy bacteria. And so people who are raised taking a lot of antibiotics, for example, like that has to be course corrected. You have to get your gut flora back to a space. And there are ways to do that. There are really healthy ways. The thing that's really amazing is when you start eating healthy, then the things that you once misperceived to be nutritious, or because it tasted good, those things don't taste good anymore. The high sugar.
Right. You get resensitized to how those things actually affect you.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's value. And then back to that point about food is when we really tap in and recognize that everything that we take in, like you are what you eat, right? And whatever you take in, if it's artificial, if it's a preservative, if it's loaded with glucose spiking, insulin spiking, some ingredients, then you're effectively shooting yourself in the foot. You're de-optimizing your natural energy. And if you optimize it with what you put in your body, it's an entirely different world, and it's worth the effort, and it's worth the time and the energy to figure that out, and as well the resource it requires to acquire it. It's not always cheap to eat that cleanly, especially in our world. And it's super easy to go to McDonald's and get something that's $3, but it's poison. And that's the unfortunate part, is like our culture is designed to, and that's where the whole like equal rights and equal access is what has to, of course, occur. That's part of where living Prana is at right now, where, we're seeing those that can afford it love what we've created, and our products, because they're, certified organic, certified kosher, certified vegan, high level, nutrient dense adaptogens, those items in general aren't inexpensive, right? So we're looking at how do we, and we've even been trying to now figure out the metrics to figure out how we can get this to the masses, and going down the road of, we have a just add water Prana cake, right? That literally provides a high concentration of the nutrients every body needs, just add water mix. And so a close friend of mine has worked with a number of nonprofits and NGOs on how to meet refugee camps in ways and support. And so we're like, oh, wow, this perfect vehicle to get nutrients to people in a way that they can actually digest them cleanly. They're low FODMAP, so people with digestive imbalances eat this stuff. So that's kind of, I think all these little angles are starting to dovetail of, oh, we've created something that we believe is going to support more than just those who can afford it, you know?
Yeah, I love that. I was even thinking like we got to get living prana into schools for kids. Like my school lunches were horrendous. So
Yeah, we're keen on getting in contact with RFK. So if anybody knows
yeah,
in there, he's definitely someone who would appreciate what we've created, and also just how relevant it is for children to have nutrients while they're learning, as opposed to a cereal breakfast that's got, gluten, glyphosate
crazy
infused,
amounts of sugar.
whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't serve the biome or the brain, and therefore their education is lacking as a result. Regardless of how it's being presented, they just can't retain it, even if it is presented in a good way. And so that's like, let's curb that problem and see what we can do about enhancing children's ability to learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I love that. So I'll ask you one more question about this. It could be about your company specifically, or just the way, I'll ask you sort of an idyllic or idealized visioning for the future. Like, where would you like to see, our country, our world go in terms of food and how we begin to, you mentioned RFK and maybe some administrative reform or things like that. Do you
yeah.
have any like grand visions for where how we could begin to change things, reconnect with the food that comes from the soil that that connects to our bodies, and how that could begin to change?
It's a great question. I appreciate it too. I'll start with just the legislative side of it. I believe that there are too many ingredients that have been conveniently not limited through the FDA and through the administrative bodies that are largely funded by the companies that are getting away with murder, if you will, in terms of creating foods that create metabolic imbalance, that create disease, that create the horrific nature of health. So I think there's that side of it. There's also the awareness side, which is really beautiful right now. I believe there's a lot of people championing a lot of awareness around what we're feeding our children, what we're feeding ourselves, so awareness being the second one, legislation awareness, and then just personal ownership. And I'm guilty of this too. We can so easily justify drinking or eating something that we recognize isn't going to benefit our body, but it tastes good or it's convenient. And we have to take ownership of that, because what does happen, if we're not even aware of it now, is that our emotions, our dysregulation, our relationships all suffer as a result, because this metabolic imbalance has compound effects over time, especially to where now you're spiking and all over the map emotionally and hormonally. And those are the things that people have to take ownership and have to make the changes. And maybe that whole retrograde conversation we had is part of that, of really reevaluating what you're doing and then even why you're doing it. And if you're getting comfort from it, it's not wrong. You're getting something from it. And is there a way to get that comfort from something that's healthier?
Yeah, it really starts to hit at addiction, and our relationship to substances. We just have a very addictive um body, personality, mind. We're a very addicted species, and it's very easy to, probably because of those evolutionary reasons, but food is the arguably the hardest drug to realign in terms of our relationship.
It is. And then to that point, there's a lot of interests that want to keep it that way.
Hmm.
That's where it comes back to like having people standing up and saying this isn't okay, and people in a position of power to make change requisite. And that's the other side is, there are people, human beings, fellow human beings, who are running these companies, who are running these labs to make these foods more addictive and laden with chemicals that are cheaper than the natural ingredients, and realizing that, where's the conscience in all of this? I realize that the system is what it is, but at the end of the day, if you recognize what you are doing has a negative impact on the world, you have to check yourself. And that's something that Casey Means is a good example. For those who don't know her, she's a Stanford medical grad in her residency, dropped the entire thing and dropped out and said, I can't do this because this is sick care, not health care. And she's done a couple amazing podcasts with her brother Callie. And if you guys don't know them, check them out. Yeah, they're on Joe Rogan. They were amazing, and they've been on a lot. They're really at the forefront of this conversation. And so, yeah, I think the institutions themselves, I think across the board, it comes down to humans taking ownership of where they have a responsibility. And I think that comes all the way back to what you're talking about with addiction, which I recognize that's got layers to it in terms of whether it's just we've been eating blindly and now we're addicted to whatever it is we've grown accustomed to. And there's other ways we could talk about addiction, which is its own podcast, I'm sure. But the truth is, and this comes back to, for me at least, on a very real personal practice. And for me, it's been Vipassana meditation, where you come into a relationship with craving and aversion, and you realize that all stimulus is, and all attachment and all equanimity disrupting is based on a craving to feel more of whatever it is we like, the taste, the sweets, the whatever, or an aversion. And realizing that if I'm dictated by my cravings or aversions, I'm not conscious. I'm simply just being dictated by, let's say it's the gut biome, or it's chasing the high and the sensation, or avoiding looking at the uncomfortable elements of my own humanity and human condition. And that's, if I was going to throw one thing, that would be my greatest prayer and intention, is that human beings take responsibility for themselves and do the necessary work to course correct where there are imbalances or there are trajectories that they're on that are not benefiting the harmony of the whole.
Yeah, and it's like kind of like just living in the lower octave of our being, whereas moving to the higher octave of our being, there maybe we do collectively, because right now is an interesting time. Like I went for a long time plant-based, but then I did need to, or I felt the need to start incorporating more meat because I was very ungrounded, and I struggle with that kind of stuff, and my body was kind of suffering. So I don't, have strong opinions one way or the other, because I think bodies are different and we're all needing different things. But in the future, down the line, maybe we do collectively, our bodies can evolve to need less meat, not need meat at all. And maybe, farther down the line, we just are fueled by light. Like you said, like maybe we'll ditch these bodies and we'll just, it'll be the highest octave of integrating spirit with physicality in
Yeah.
terms of what we need less of to fuel ourselves.
Yeah, it's remarkable when you understand how intermittent fasting works and autophagy works, and how these zombie cells can be literally composted internally, so it doesn't create this stagnation and disease that can result from bodies that haven't, optimized their digestive capacities. And in that, like you said, suddenly you don't need as much.
Yeah.
And especially if you're eating clean and understand, like, oh, I need protein and fat and carbohydrates, and to do this in a way that is orderly in the day to optimize my brain capacity, which is what we're all here to do. Basically, is just be as coherent and creative and productive as we can be.
Yeah.
With all that we've talked about, and the diet does lend itself, and it'd be amazing to be fed by light. And I know there are breatharians on the world. People do this. I always thought, like, when I get to a retirement place, to go live in Maui, where the mana is so rich. And I imagine, being a breatharian, I don't think functioning in the world and being a breatharian could work.
No, to clarify, those are people who just are fueled by breath and they don't eat. Is that?
Yeah. Breatharians are literally just, they aren't eating.
Yeah.
They're just existing on the mana in Hawaii, or the Shakti that they're getting from nature.
Yeah. Very curious about that.
But maybe it's what we are slowly but surely evolving into.
Yeah. Well, from what I sense about, ET civilizations and things like that, there's it's definitely a different way of getting nutrients, of what you're fueled by. So we will see. But this has been another beautiful conversation, as I anticipated it would be. We got to cover even more ground. This feels like a good place to begin to wrap things up. I'll open it up for you if there's anything else you'd like to speak to, comment on, share about before we begin to close out.
And we covered a lot, so I appreciate the time.
Yeah, we did. We certainly did.
Definitely, I'm not wearing a hat this time, so they're not going to be able to tell us apart at all.
Yeah, exactly. We're really going to be blended.
It's great.
And maybe, yeah, maybe there are going to be things. I've heard there's going to be, I literally heard my mother was like, oh, yeah, the technologies now, like, no one's going to be bald in the future. I'm like, all right. So they're putting all their resources into regrowing hair and things like that. So
There's a lot coming out. It's true.
yeah.
But yeah, if anything, look, if anybody wants to follow, I throw astrology stuff up on Instagram. My handle is at Ryan Scott Seaman, RyanScottSeaman. And Living Prana is my the superfood pancake waffle company I co-founded with Brian Murphy, and that's living_prana. And yeah, I think that hopefully people feel inspired to do something new and exciting for their soul, to evolve in these ways that I believe the astrology that's coming is going to require us to be firmly connected to.
Oh yeah, there's going to be some strong invitations. I have no doubt. And I will put all those links in the show notes. And thank you again, Ryan. This was another amazing conversation, and I am quite sure we will do it again and have lots more to chat about, as there will be lots more to discuss.
There always is. Doing this work,
Okay.
Daniel. It's a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Talk
Yeah,
to you
brother.
soon.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. If you liked the episode and would like to support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review anywhere you listen. And if you'd like to connect further, feel free to reach out on Instagram or my website at drdanielatkins.com. I offer individual consultations as well as group workshops, both virtually and in person, depending on my whereabouts. And I am always open to collaboration. Until then, may you be the vessel for your highest vision. Blessings for the ride.